Let me tell you about my aunt, the self-proclaimed queen of our family. She is the kind of person who makes you wonder how someone so unpleasant could possibly be related to you. I've had to deal with her my entire life, and trust me, it's been a special kind of torture. When I was a kid in a small Midwestern town, family gatherings were a big deal. My parents always stressed the importance of staying close with relatives, which meant frequent visits to my aunt's house. She acted like she was better than everyone, especially us kids. We weren't allowed to sit on her couches, use her bathroom, or talk unless she spoke to us first. At family get-togethers, she made sure the kids ate outside or in the garage, even in the winter, just so she wouldn't have to hear us. My aunt had this bizarre habit of playing favorites among the family members, but the position of favorite rotated faster than the seasons. One month my cousin would be the golden child, receiving gifts and praise, and the next month they'd be practically disowned because they didn't compliment her new haircut enthusiastically enough. Everyone walked on eggshells around her, afraid of becoming her next target. She was nasty when it came to anyone who wasn't exactly like her, meaning white, middle class, and born in our small town. Her comments about my biracial cousins were disgusting, and she'd make no effort to hide her disdain for my uncle's second wife who had immigrated from the Philippines. I managed to escape much of her toxicity when I left for college, limiting our interactions to major holidays and occasional family gatherings. But last summer, I couldn't avoid her when our extended family decided to have a big reunion to celebrate my grandparents' 60th wedding anniversary. The reunion was said to be a 3-day event at a rented lakeside property. My parents had asked me to help coordinate since I had experience planning events for my job. I was genuinely excited to see everyone. Well, almost everyone. 2 weeks before the reunion, I received a call from my aunt. She immediately launched into a discussion about sleeping arrangements, declaring that she would be taking the master suite in the main house. When I explained that my grandparents would be staying there since it was their anniversary celebration, she became indignant. She dismissed my reasoning, claiming that my grandparents wouldn't appreciate it like she would, suggesting they take a smaller room instead. She mentioned her back problems, needing a proper mattress, and emphasized her status as the oldest daughter. I had to take a deep breath to maintain my patience. I explained that the arrangements had already been decided, with my grandparents in the master suite and her in the blue room on the second floor, which had its own bathroom and a queen bed. She responded with outrage, claimed she had contributed the most to the family, and hung up before I could say anything else. Over the next 2 weeks, she called everyone, my parents, my uncles, and even my grandparents, trying to get her way. Nobody gave in, which only fueled her anger. When the reunion day finally arrived, I got to the property early to help set up. My parents and cousins came to assist, and everything was going well until my aunt arrived 3 hours earlier than expected. She stormed up to the house pulling 2 enormous suitcases, didn't even say hello, and went straight to the master suite to start unpacking. My dad noticed and went to confront her. He questioned what she was doing, reminding her the room was for my grandparents. She smugly replied that she had arrived first, citing possession as 9/10 of the law, and suggested they take the blue room instead. When my dad insisted that wasn't how things worked and reminded her of the agreed arrangements, she became defensive, insisting she deserved that room and hadn't agreed to anything. Their argument continued until my grandfather arrived. He used a stern voice I rarely heard from him, telling my aunt to move her things immediately. She reluctantly complied but muttered about disrespect and ingratitude the entire time. At dinner that evening, my aunt gave everyone the silent treatment, dramatically sighing and rolling her eyes whenever someone spoke. When my grandmother asked for the salt, my aunt pretended not to hear. It was childish and uncomfortable, but we all tried to enjoy ourselves despite her behavior. The next morning, I was coordinating a family photo by the lake when my aunt showed up wearing a floor-length white gown that looked suspiciously like a wedding dress. My grandmother pulled me aside with concern about my aunt's inappropriate attire, noting that this wasn't her event to steal attention from. I approached my aunt, trying to be diplomatic. I complimented her dress but suggested she might want to change into something more casual for the family photo since we were all wearing blue and green. She smugly told me her dress costs more than my entire wardrobe. She refused to change her outfit because some color-blind amateur was trying to dictate what she should wear. When I reminded her we had discussed the color scheme weeks ago and everyone else had followed it, she haughtily declared that she wasn't everyone else and always stood out. She refused to change, so we took the photos with her looking like she was about to walk down the aisle at someone else's anniversary party. Every time I tried to arrange people, she would move to the center, pushing my grandparents aside to be the focal point. The situation reached its peak during the anniversary dinner. We had rented a private room at my grandparents' favorite restaurant. Everyone had contributed to the expense, except my aunt, who claimed her presence was her contribution and more valuable than money. As we waited for our food, my cousin's husband stood up to make a toast. Being relatively new to the family, having married my cousin just 8 months earlier, he was visibly nervous but sincere. He began by thanking my grandparents for welcoming him into the family, noting that 60 years of marriage was an incredible achievement, and their love was an inspiration to everyone. Before he could continue, my aunt loudly interrupted. She dismissed his sentiments as Hallmark card material, pointed out that he barely knew them, and insisted that she should be giving the toast because she was their daughter. The room fell silent. My cousin's husband sat down, clearly embarrassed. Slowly, my grandfather stood up, his face flushed with anger. He told my aunt that enough was enough. He explained that for 60 years, he had watched her put herself above everyone else, insult his grandchildren, disrespect their partners, and make every family gathering about herself. He stated that this wouldn't happen tonight, not at their celebration. My aunt looked stunned, having never heard my grandfather speak to her this way before. She claimed she had done so much for the family. My grandmother questioned what exactly she had done, pointing out that she hadn't helped plan the reunion, hadn't visited them in months, and refused to even call her own brother because his wife wasn't their kind. My aunt protested that this wasn't fair and insisted she had always put family first. At this point, my uncle, who had been quiet throughout most of the reunion, finally spoke up. He accused her of always putting herself first, bringing up last year's incident when our grandmother was in the hospital and everyone showed up except her because she had a hair appointment. She defended herself, saying it was an expensive appointment and she would have been charged for canceling. One by one, family members shared stories of how she had hurt them, let them down, or treated them poorly over the years. With each example, she became more defensive and agitated. Finally, she declared the situation ridiculous, claimed she was being ambushed, and refused to listen to what she called lies. When she stood up to leave, my grandmother warned her that if she walked out, she shouldn't expect to be welcomed back until she acknowledged how she had treated the family and apologized. My aunt responded indignantly, asking what she should apologize for, claiming she was the only one with standards and declaring she was fine with the family proceeding without her. She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. At the door, she turned back, clearly expecting someone to stop her or beg her to stay. No one did. The silence must have been deafening for her. After a moment of awkward tension, my grandfather raised his glass in a toast to family, those who show up, support each other, and love unconditionally. He wished for 60 more years of that kind of family. Everyone raised their glasses, and the celebration continued with a noticeably lighter atmosphere now that my aunt's negativity was gone. Later that evening, as we enjoyed dessert, I received a text from my aunt. She claimed we had made a terrible mistake, would regret pushing her away, and not to expect her at Christmas. I showed the message to my mother, who remarked that it sounded more like a gift than a threat. We all laughed, and for the first time in my memory, a family gathering felt completely comfortable and genuinely joyful. The reunion continued for one more day, and it was the best family event I can remember. People laughed freely, the kids played without being shushed, and even relatives who usually kept to themselves joined in the activities. My aunt didn't show up for the final day, but she sent numerous texts to various family members, alternating between playing the victim and threatening to cut people out of her will. Nobody responded, which only prompted more messages. It's been 6 months since the reunion, and true to her word, my aunt didn't attend our family Christmas. Instead of her usual dramatic performance stealing focus from the holiday, we had a peaceful celebration filled with genuine warmth. My grandparents seemed decades younger without the stress of mediating her behavior. The family group chat has been buzzing with plans for the next gathering, a summer barbecue at my uncle's place. For the first time, nobody is anxiously wondering how to manage my aunt's demands or tantrums. We're just looking forward to being together. I've lived in this small apartment complex for about 3 years now. It's nothing fancy, just a modest building with 12 units and a communal parking lot that has no assigned spaces. Well, except for two disabled parking spots near the front entrance. I've always liked the place because most of my neighbors are decent folks who mind their own business. That is, until I had the misfortune of crossing paths with one woman who moved in about 6 months ago. I work as a bartender at a local restaurant, which means I often come home late. My wife works regular hours as an elementary school teacher, so we don't get to spend as much time together as we'd like. That's why her birthday is always a big deal for us. This year, she wanted to go out clubbing with her best friend from college, who lives about an hour away. My wife's friend has multiple sclerosis. She can walk, but long distances are difficult for her, especially when she's having a flare-up. That's why she has a legitimate handicap parking permit that hangs from her rearview mirror. I've always made sure to respect those spots myself, even if I'm just running in for a minute. The day of my wife's birthday started out perfectly. I had the day off and made her favorite breakfast. We spent the afternoon together, and then her friend called to say she was on her way. Unfortunately, while she was driving over, a storm knocked down a huge oak tree in our parking lot. Maintenance was already working on clearing it, but the fallen tree blocked off about half the available spaces. When my wife's friend arrived, she drove around looking for a spot, but the only accessible ones were the two disabled parking spaces. She pulled into one of them, making sure her handicap tag was clearly visible. When she came up to our apartment, she seemed worried. She asked me if it was okay that she had parked in one of the disabled spots since the parking situation was such a mess. I reassured her that it was completely fine since she had a valid permit, and that's exactly what those spots are for. I explained that there was only one other resident who used them, and since there were two spots, it shouldn't be a problem. We got ready for the night out, and my wife was excited about celebrating her birthday. Right before we left, I went down to warm up my car. That's when I noticed something strange. A car had parked directly behind my wife's friend's car, blocking her in completely. What made it even more bizarre was that the second disabled spot was completely empty. I immediately recognized the car as belonging to a woman who lived on the first floor. She was relatively new to the building and had a reputation for being difficult. I'd had a few unpleasant elevator rides with her where she complained about everything from the landscaping to the hallway lighting. I went straight to the apartment manager's office to report the situation. I told him that someone had blocked in our friend's car, even though she was parked legally in the disabled spot with her permit displayed. The manager sighed and said this wasn't the first problem with that particular resident. He promised to talk to her and ask her to move her car. I thanked him and asked him to make sure she moved it by morning so our friend could leave. We decided not to let this ruin our night. We took my car instead and went out to celebrate my wife's birthday. We had a great time at several clubs downtown dancing and enjoying ourselves. We got back to the apartment around 3 a.m., exhausted but happy. When we pulled into the lot, I immediately checked the disabled spots. To my disbelief, our friend's car was still blocked in, and the other disabled spot was still completely empty. The woman had ignored the manager's request to move her car. My wife's friend noticed right away and expressed her dismay, wondering what we should do. I told her I was calling the police because the situation was ridiculous. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. The officer looked at the situation, shaking his head and actually laughing. He asked why she didn't just park in the next spot since it made no sense. I honestly told him I had no idea and mentioned that the manager had asked her to move hours ago. The officer then suggested, with a hint of mischief in his voice, that we should wake her up and ask her directly. It was about 3:30 a.m. at this point. The officer went to her door and did that loud, authoritative police knock that's impossible to sleep through. After several minutes, She answered the door in a bathrobe, looking angry. The officer told her she needed to move her vehicle immediately as she was illegally blocking another car. She responded with indignation, claiming it was her spot and that she was teaching someone a lesson. The officer explained that it wasn't her personal spot, that these were communal disabled parking spaces, and there was literally another identical spot right next to it that was completely empty and even closer to her door. She tried to argue that she always parked in that specific spot. The officer warned her to move her car right away and to think very carefully about what she said next, as she was getting close to going to jail for disorderly conduct. She glared at all of us, but eventually stomped off to move her car. She kept muttering under her breath the whole time, but was careful not to say anything directly to the officer. Once she moved her car, we thanked the officer, and he left. The next morning, I ran into the apartment manager. He mentioned that he heard there was quite a scene the night before. I confirmed this and told him she had refused to move her car until the police made her. The manager then shared that she had actually yelled at him too when he asked her earlier. She had said something about teaching people to respect what she considered her spot. He also revealed that she was already 3 months behind on rent. He had been trying to work with her, but after this incident, they were starting eviction proceedings. About a month later, the manager approached me with an unusual offer. He reminded me of the woman from the parking incident and explained that she had been evicted but left a bunch of her stuff behind. He offered to pay me $150 to box it up and store it in the basement. I agreed and spent a Saturday boxing up her abandoned items. The basement was dusty and had some water damage in spots, so her belongings weren't exactly being stored in pristine condition. But after what she put my wife's friend through on what was supposed to be a special night, I couldn't say I felt bad about it. I've been taking my golden retriever to the Oakwood Dog Park every weekend for almost 2 years now. It's our special time together. I work long hours as a nurse, and these Saturday mornings are when my big guy gets to run free and play with other dogs. He's the sweetest thing, always gentle with smaller dogs and puppies. Never had an issue until last weekend. I just unclipped his leash in the designated off-leash area when I noticed a woman with a tiny chihuahua by the bench. Unlike everyone else's dogs, her little one was running around without a leash, even in the entrance area where signs clearly state all dogs must remain leashed. I didn't think much of it at first. We were all there to let our dogs have fun, right? My golden spotted a tennis ball and bounded over to grab it, which unfortunately was near where her chihuahua was standing. My dog didn't even notice the tiny pup, just wanted the ball, but suddenly the woman erupted. She started shouting at me to get my monster away from her princess. She asked if I knew what a purebred was, her voice shrill with anger. I tried to explain that my dog was just playing and wasn't even looking at hers, but she wouldn't listen. She went on about how hers was a certified purebred chihuahua and asked if I had any idea how much it cost. She claimed my dog could kill hers in one bite, calling my golden a mutt in the process. I was stunned. My dog had already trotted away with his ball, completely uninterested in her dog. I told her that this was a public dog park and all dogs were welcome regardless of breed or size. She insisted that when her dog, which she called Princess, was there, she deserved priority. She mentioned paying taxes for the park as if that gave her special rights. By now, other dog owners were watching the scene unfold. My golden came back, dropping the ball at my feet, wagging his tail. The woman physically stepped between our dogs. She demanded that everyone needed to leave right away because her purebred needed exercise and claimed our mongrels were endangering her dog. Another dog owner spoke up, telling her that's not how public parks work. She responded by threatening to call animal control. She said my golden dog was aggressive and dangerous, though he was doing nothing but sitting calmly. She pulled out her phone and made the call right there, describing my perfectly calm dog as a vicious animal attacking smaller dogs. I was furious but decided to wait for animal control to arrive so I could explain the situation. 20 minutes later, an animal control officer showed up. The woman immediately ran over. She frantically pointed out my dog to the officer, claiming that the golden one had tried to attack her princess. The officer looked at my calm dog sitting beside me, then at her chihuahua running freely around the park without a leash. The officer asked her if that was her dog running without a leash. She defended herself by saying it was a purebred that didn't need a leash because it was trained. As if on cue, a toddler visiting the park with his parents squealed at the sight of the tiny dog and started chasing it. The Chihuahua, far from being the perfectly trained purebred she claimed, panicked and bolted, racing around the park with a giggling toddler in pursuit. The officer told her that the city ordinance clearly states all dogs must be leashed except in designated off-leash areas, regardless of breed or training. The officer wrote her a ticket for violating leash laws. She turned bright red, screaming about how she'd sue the city and have everyone's dogs confiscated. She threatened the officer's job and asked if he knew who she was, trying to intimidate him. The officer simply replied that she was someone getting a $150 ticket. It took her 10 minutes to catch her Chihuahua, which had found refuge under a bench, trembling from the toddler's attention, not from any other dogs. An elderly man with a poodle walked over to me. He told me he'd been coming to the park for a very long time, and that was the best entertainment he'd seen. He added that my dog was a good boy. My golden just wagged his tail, completely oblivious to the drama he'd supposedly caused. We've been back twice since then, and thankfully, there's been no sign of the purebred princess or her owner.